How many of you have attended other Litquake events this week? Nice. The week has still got a ways to go, so I'm hoping you're going to fill it up a little. There's obviously something for everyone in the San Francisco Literary Festival. From this, which internally we refer to as the highbrow event, right down to writers and wrestlers at the Hemlock Club on Friday night. And the infamous Lit Crawl, which I think has 70 different venues, 400 authors, all over the Mission District on Saturday night. Unmitigated literary chaos. So this is our 12th festival. It was founded by local writers in 1999. And the first event featured 22 authors on one Friday afternoon in Golden Gate Park. I actually think that there was a previous one where the co-founders, Jack Boulware and Jane Ganal, actually stood in a BART station and read pieces from different books as people were going by and probably collected a little bit of money because they were pumped. This year, over 850 authors in over 150 venues around the Bay Area and 9 days of programming. And we're not sure, but we think this might be a world record for number of authors in one literary festival. Litquake events were over 75% free, and we could not put on this festival without the help of our sponsors and you coming and enjoying what we managed to put together. So this is my favorite event. Got Soul. This is a very eclectic group, a very wide-ranging group of people that I managed to bring for you. And let me introduce them. I'm going to start here on my immediate right. Dr. Thomas Lewis is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at UC San Francisco and co-author of A General Theory of Love. He studies, writes, and speaks on the interface between neuroscience and the human experience. Thomas Lewis. To his immediate right is Flora Keshgegian. She is an Episcopal priest and associate professor of pastoral theology at the Church of Divinity School of the Pacific, is author of God Reflected, Metaphors for Life, Time for Hope, and Redeeming Memories. To her immediate right is, of course, Michael Krasny. Michael Krasny hosts the award-winning KQED Forum program and is professor of English at San Francisco State University. In fact, he just came from a class, rushed over from State just a few minutes ago. He also teaches at Stanford and is author of Off Mic and Spiritual Envy. He's got a bit of a sore throat, and as we all know, his voice is his primary tool for his job, so he's got tea. We're not going to stress him too much tonight. To his immediate right is Starhawk. Starhawk brings the power of spirituality to political activism. She is a respected voice in modern goddess religion and earth-based spirituality. Her books include, she has several books, and they include The Spiral Dance, The Fifth Sacred Thing, and The Empowerment Manual, which is coming out next month. To her immediate right is Dr. Richard Muller. He is a renowned physics professor. He's got a unique talent for making science accessible to all of us by teaching what has been known as what was voted as the best class at Berkeley, and by writing books like Physics for Future Presidents and The Instant Physicist. He was also recently named to the top 50 brave thinkers of 2011 by the Atlantic magazine. And he informs me that his graduate student and postdoc won the Nobel Prize last week when they overlooked me.
Well, I'm just, when I was a kid, I used to ponder that question of whether the red I saw was the red you saw, and I never knew anybody else who wondered about that.
I was just thinking that maybe the question also is how we see it, why do we see it? The why sometimes are more compelling than the hows. And I like what Professor Muller said about gratitude, but the problem for many of us is we feel gratitude, or Starhawk said we feel awe, but we don't know where to place it. And so what we place a kind of faith in, I suppose, in many instances, is ritual in itself. You pray, and you pray with faith, I presume, but there are prayers that go, there are prayers that go out there just almost ritualistically. Recently I had Stephen Greenblatt on my radio program. He was talking about this extraordinary poem by Lucretius that was rediscovered on the nature of things, and there's a sense of that causing a swerve in modernity to make us, when we think of it as a modern age, more secular and more sort of uprooted, and with atoms constantly in collision and all of that. But the thesis that he was working with was the idea that we can have ritual, and ritual can be very meaningful to us, and ritual can make us connected with other human beings and with ourselves, and with something that feels like it's numinous, that feels like it's palpable beyond ourselves. But what that is, I think, is part of the mystery that either you feel alive with or you feel confounded by.
Dr. Keshgegian, what is the role of the...
Can I respond to Michael?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. He seemed surprised when I said I don't have faith. I don't have faith. I don't like faith. Faith is what you have when you're a kid and you believe in Santa Claus. Faith is when there's no evidence for what someone's telling you and they just want you to believe it anyway. I don't like faith. To me, the spiritual...
You said you believe that you have a soul. That to me,
yes.
That to me is faith.
No. I perceive that. I see it. It isn't based on someone telling me I have a soul. I am aware of it. I know it. It is true knowledge. Faith is faith in something that someone tells you you should believe in, even though the evidence is against it or because there's no evidence whatsoever. To me, the soul is so completely obvious. It's the most fundamental observation.
Could you define what you mean by soul? Is it simply sentience?
I cannot define it in physics sense, but I can do it through...
Awareness?
To me, it's Aretha Franklin singing.
No.
And always will be. No, I don't know how you can speak about a soul in any concrete way. I mean, it doesn't...
You mean in any physics way?
Well, you're a physicist. And
right, I cannot. I can only do it by example, by describing things like colors and so on, which you can misinterpret. And you might think it's something to do with psychology, but I can't do it in physics terms because it's a world of knowledge that is outside of the world of physics. I believe it's one of the most misinterpreted statements of all time is Descartes when he said, "I think, therefore I am." I believe this is what he meant. What he meant is somewhere behind that brain there is a soul. And because there is something in that soul there, I know I exist.
Forgive me, but we read Cartesian philosophy entirely differently. What Descartes said when he said, "Cogito ergo sum," was, I am the subject and there is an object that is outside of me and the two are split. And maybe that's part of the irrationality that we can't understand, that our rational processes can't really comprehend. I cannot comprehend there being a soul. And I wish I could, but I think it's a leap of faith in order to believe that. If you talk about seeing the color red, there are synesthesiacs, for example, who look and they see different colors than you see. They see numbers as colors. Does that mean what they're seeing?
About that too. That's
well,
the subject.
Does that mean what they're seeing is real? I don't know. I mean, it's not what I see is real.
Well, there's nothing about color that's real at all, in fact. There is no color in the natural world. Color is a way that your brain interprets certain information in order to portray it for you in an efficient way that allows you to go through the world without constantly having to think, what is the wavelength of the radiation bouncing off the pillar? But there is no color in the universe.
That's what I learned in my 6th grade teacher.
But it is purely a manifestation of the virtual reality in which you and that's why you can see glitches in the program where some people see numbers as colored and vice versa.
My reaction is you didn't understand.
I
want to say something about faith. I think your definition of faith is incredibly narrow, and nobody can live on this earth without faith. All of us in this room are here because we have faith that the ceiling won't collapse. We have faith that when we walk out of here, the air will not assault us in some way. If we didn't, we wouldn't be able to exist on this planet. And that's why we get so jarred when the ceiling does collapse. I moved to California and I was told, when I walked into a room to check it out, maybe, and see where the exits were in case of an earthquake. It was a whole way different for me to situate myself in the world because I have not lived someplace where I have to worry about earthquakes. So to me, faith is about trust, and we just have a basic trust that we can have life. Otherwise, we just couldn't be here. Now, you can fashion that faith and define it in particular ways, but faith is a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human. It doesn't have to be religious faith, but a faith in life, a faith in other people, that connection is possible. It's interesting to me, we were talking about seeing. I also want to talk about being seen. There's a way in which, seeing and being seen have to go together if there's going to be a real connection. And so, to me, those are the fundamental things that allow us to live our lives.
I appreciate your characterizing my thinking as narrow. It makes me more humble here.
Well, I was talking about...
Well, no, but I use the word faith about soul. I think that if you believe there is a soul, then you have faith that there is a soul. That comes from what I would characterize as...
I agree with that thing.
I still don't know what a soul
But
is.
I don't think about soul. I'm the theologian here, and that is not a term I think about, worry about, write about.
What can you? What's a classic definition for a soul?
Not a term I think about, but classically it is. You can go back to Plato, and it is the most real part of a person. So it is real in a way in which physicality, mind are not real.
So is it reptilian or
This is Plato.
Is surviving after death a necessary property of the soul, or
No,
then wouldn't you just be describing it as self?
I'm just quoting Plato.
He's dead, so.
So we can't defend
Well, in
him.
that sense, he's not dead, right? He managed to
Well,
get here.
besides, writing about spirituality, I'm also a novelist. And a novelist, you're creating characters. And as you create characters, those characters kind of come alive. And they come alive as if they had a soul, although they're invented. But they come alive through the choices that they make. And to me, I think that goes somewhat to the core of the question of soul and spirit, that in some sense we are the choices that we make. And so, who makes that choice? If there's no soul, who, how is it that one person might choose, to share their bread with somebody else, and somebody else might choose to eat it all and keep it all to themselves? I don't know. To me, that goes into the mystery.
Isn't that free will? Isn't that existential? Why does it have to be tied to something of a higher power or soul, for that matter?
It's not necessarily a higher power, but it's who is it who's
That's
making
fine.
that choice?
That's my question.
It's the self.
That's one question also. Is so that if we're talking about does everyone have a self, or most people have a self, that seems relatively self-evident. But is self and soul, are they synonymous terms for those on the pen?
No.
No, not at all for me. As I said, if you imagine yourself becoming me, do you lose yourself because of that? Even if you have all my memories? Am I only the sum of my molecules? I think that because the idea of the soul, you can give it other names. You can say, you can come up with terms like self, and begin to drift towards using the term soul into a more physical one. But that's just using language to try to get away from what I consider the ultimate concept here. Yes, I have faith. I have faith the ceiling will fall down. Why? Because it's based on my experience. But I don't have faith that I have a soul. That's a direct observation. I will use the word faith. I'm happy with that.
Do you distinguish it from physically observable things?
Absolutely.
So it's a dualistic philosophy.
It's a what? It's not a philosophy.
Well, it's a dualistic concept then. There's an in here and an out there.
What I say is, yes, they have to be called dualistic.
The spiritual and the physical
There is a
are
spiritual
complementary.
world, and there is a physical world, and through me, they are connected.
So if there's a spiritual world, my immediate question would ask, what exists in that spiritual world? And we can
Our
experience...
souls and God.
I mean, but, you know, the immediate question comes back to how can we experience that through our senses, or can we?
No, not
So it's metaphysical, it's above the physical.
Not through your senses. It's something the senses are physical. Emotions. I like to draw a fine distinction, an absolute distinction between the emotional world and the spiritual world. To me, they're totally different.
Can you explain how?
You know, most of these issues, I can't explain it except by parable, which is a traditional way that people explain things. In other words, if you ask me to explain this thing, I had an argument with a physicist in which he said, your comment about whether I see red or blue is a nonsense question. And, well, I agree, to him it didn't seem to be that way. But I think in parable what you're trying to do is that I believe everybody here, at least when they were young, were aware of their own soul. And maybe they've been taught by scientists or by teachers that it doesn't exist. It's an illusion, it's emotion, it's psychology, it is something else.
But how does that reduce the concept of the soul? What if it is simply a biochemical process? Why does that reduce it?
Because then you're misunderstanding it. That's making it into, I mean, I think everything is physics. It's making it into physics, and it's not. You're misunderstanding. You're being misled. It's like believing that God is going to come down and make your football team win. You're going off in the wrong tangent. You're missing out on the true spirituality and on the true God when you do something like that.
So, Starhawk, you talked about initially about the interconnectedness of things. And so what we've heard a lot so far is a really dualistic, that there's a line, however fine, between the spiritual and the physical.
I guess for me, you know, that line isn't there. I mean, if what I perceive as myself, my soul, whatever, is a bunch of neurons, it's like, isn't it freaking amazing that a bunch of neurons, like firing, create this sense of self and being and rapture and wonder and emotion and grief and all of those things that go into who I am or who you are. Or, you know, if you take a breath in and you consider that the actual atmosphere we're breathing was created by life as a response to a crisis way back billions of years ago when life ran out of food, original life being, you know, little bacteria that fermented things and started to run out of big molecules in the primal seas, and suddenly, somehow, it arranged itself into a molecule that, if you look at it, has this beautiful pattern, like a four-leaf clover, and has this almost miraculous quality of taking sunlight, reverberating with it, and using that energy to transform water and air into food. That's, I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? And that miracle process off-gas the oxygen that we breathe in, that life had to learn how to use because originally it was poisonous to life. So every time you breathe in, you know, if you consider that you are breathing in the entire process of the evolution of the universe and breathing in life's amazing creative responses to life-threatening crises, that's a pretty amazing meditation for me. I like to just breathe in with awe and wonder and gratitude and breathe out as a conscious gift back to that green world of some carbon dioxide and think about the balance. That's all science. You know, I mean, I didn't get that out of some mystical vision. I got that out of reading books about science, right? But to me, you know, it's the most awesome, it's more awesome, more wonderful than, you know, Moses parting the Red Sea or something else, which I love. Their stories, their metaphors, their narratives. But science really tells us, science has got some really good stories right now, I'd say, right? And maybe it's all stories, it's all part of that virtual world our brains are creating. I think our brains need to create stories as well as, you know, images and all those other things. But I think science has some really, really great stories.
pick up on the notion of wonder, because I think that's really key here. And in terms of the types of knowing that I was talking about, what I want us to do is practice wonder more than our culture helps us to do. And so for me, whatever, if it's staring at a four-leaf clover, or if it's contemplating your own breathing, or if it's, for me, often it's the moon that kind of evokes that kind of feeling. I think it's really important that we get back in touch with that sense of wonder, which is something that every child has absolutely. And one of the things I talk about in the Time for Hope book is habits that we have to cultivate in our day and age in order to have hope. And one of the habits is wild wonder. And I think we need to practice that habit.
No, I think it's an important habit to emphasize, but I need to ask you, in the name of experiencing awe or wonder, which is something majestic and part of the whole human experiment, does it have to be, or should it be allied to, I mean, you're a theologian, does it have to be allied to something that we're thinking of as having a spiritual dimension to it? In other words, I know people who come to me and they say, I have community with nature, I feel connected to nature, I feel a higher power, but I don't necessarily have, again, what I think we're calling a cornerstone or an undergirding of belief, faith.
I haven't talked about belief. I've talked about attitude, relationship, trust. I've talked about ways in which we are in relationship with reality, mundane reality, ultimate reality, and reality. Belief is the story, the narrative that you put on that. And there are lots of narratives. And there are a lot of different belief systems for people. And, that is a way to give it form and community and structure and, like I said, story. But more fun, what's really fundamentally going on in all of those various stories, structures, etc., is this relating to life in a really fundamental way, in an open way, a trusting way, and in a wondrous way.
So I wanted to, before we open the floor to questions, I wanted to comment that the notion of breathing and air and the essence is the root of the definition of spirituality. I looked it up in the Oxford English. So is there a biochemical process? Is there something that goes on in the mind when you take a breath and try to clear your mind that reflects something that you might be able to define as a spiritual process physically?
You're asking me?
I'm asking you.
Well, there are people who experience that as a spiritual process, and then there are many people who don't, and there are many times when one don't. And, I've been breathing all day today, but it hasn't been particularly spiritual. And so
I'm sorry to
now,
hear that.
but in response to your question, yes, so that if you put somebody in a brain imaging scanner and they're not having a spiritual experience, and at another time they are, is there a distinct difference in their brain activity in certain emotional areas? That should be very much yes.
There's been a lot of experiment along these lines. The Dalai Lama has worked with people like Danny Goleman, in terms of things like Buddhist practice and meditation and breathing and how it can elevate the senses and elevate the mind and consciousness and really create something, I suppose, that you could call spatially a spiritual, I think Dr. Lewis said it as maybe a virtual reality, but it's a higher sense of thinking and a higher sense of emotion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that idea, but also what Flora said about awe. Because we do, in our modern society, we love physics and engineering and science so much that we do tend to lose track of that other part. And we don't go, wow, nearly as much. I try to do it every day. But I just want to share with you a little ceremony that I hope many of you would follow. In Wagner's Parsifal, Parsifal is walking home through the wilderness, and he asks Gurnemanz, why is everything so beautiful today? And Gurnemanz responds, "Oh, that's Good Friday's magic, my lord." I love that. And what I started doing with my children when they were little, and by the way, Good Friday magic or Good Friday spell is some of Wagner's most beautiful music. But what I do every Good Friday now, I started when my children were little, and I'd say, "Oh, Betsy, do you ever notice how pretty this thing is? I mean, really, just look at it. Isn't it really, really amazing when you look at it?" And she would agree. And I'd say, "That's Good Friday's magic. It's because today is Good Friday."
What about those of us who say that's plastic, it's messing up our environment?
That makes my point.
It's less pretty.
Now, the most wonderful thing happened about 40 years later when she said to me, "Daddy, isn't it true that this is really beautiful on Good Friday because that's the day when we look at it and notice it?" And so I've set up a ritual. Once a year, we make a point of, I get emails from my daughter in New York saying, "Isn't everything pretty today, Daddy?" So I'm making it into a ritual so that we don't forget that wow, awe, which is so easy to forget when we live in a world in which, because of physics, we win wars.
All right, on that note, I would like to open the floor for questions.